Dom Jones, welcome to the Active Podcast.
Thank you, Ian. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good to have you on the show. You're based up in Sendai in Japan, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Sendai. It's about 1.5 hours north of Tokyo, on the Pacific seaside. Beautiful city of about 1.5 million.
Right. Yeah, I saw some posts on Facebook this week. There's some snow up there, wasn't there?
Yeah, we had some snow up in the hills and the close by mountains. There was some snow, and it's pretty cold today, but it's okay.
Good. So let me. I pre-recorded an intro about you, so we won't go into too much detail. But I know just for the listeners, I'll outline what you're basically really into. I know you're into a lot of things, but in particular, you're into martial science and research into TPR and TPRS. So those are the main areas, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. No, I work in university and I'm an English teacher here in Japan. And so education is always close to my heart. And one of the things that I'm interested in is how to teach more effectively always. And what I found in Japan is many students find it difficult to talk. They have a good understanding of grammar, they can read well, but when it comes to communication, it's a bit of a struggle. So I've always been interested in methodologies and ways to get students to talk better.
Right. Yeah. And so, the first 30 minutes or so, I'd like to sort of talk about the stuff that you do and how we as teachers can sort of take those ideas, some of those ideas, and apply them into our real life situations in the classroom. Before I do, martial science, give me a bit of an outline. What is martial science?
So it's a good question. And the term martial science is deliberately chosen to give people pause for thought, so that they can engage you and actually listen and say, well, what is martial science? Exactly your question. The simple way of describing it is it's martial arts, but it's using the scientific method to ensure that the movements that you do are the most effective that you can. We're a self-defense based system, and we're moving from that outline from non-effective, effective, more effective, and most effective. Right. That's what the martial science is all about.
Right. Okay, and we're going to go into more detail about martial science later. But recently we met up when you came down to the Nagoya ETJ event and you did a presentation. And the following day you came down to my active English school, did sort of martial science self-defense workshop there, which was really well attended and went really well. Thanks for that.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Let's start off with the ETJ event. Your presentation there was entitled Brainbreaks. Yeah,
that's right. And again, I work in university where we have 90 minutes lessons, and often my students are pretty tired. Many of them, have second jobs they're working and then come to university. And I find in the lesson that students get tired and they lose their focus and often switch off. And Brainbreaks is a methodology of refreshing the students physically and mentally so that they can focus and learn for longer periods of time.
Right. Yeah. So can you give me some examples of a brain break that we could do in the classroom?
Yeah, exactly. I want to start with a good way to describe brain breaks is think of a sine wave. And if you think of a sine wave, it goes down and then it goes up. And if you can imagine that in relation to students' energy levels and concentration levels, yes. When they have too much energy at the top of the sine wave, the class is a bit crazy and learning is not going on. And when it goes to the bottom of the sine wave, then the students have low energy and again, learning is not going on. So we want to get them into that sweet learning zone in the middle. And this is where the Brainbreaks come into effect. So for example, if on a Monday morning you have a class of students and they're very excited about talking about the weekend, what movies did they see, who they went out with, and what did they do, and they're more focused, the energy is too high, then we can use activities to bring that energy down. And some of those activities are very simple focusing activities, like getting the students to count down from 100 in, say, multiples of 13.
Okay.
This forces the students to stop talking to their friends and really kind of focus and come into the present about, okay, well, what's 100 minus 13? So, okay, that's 87, and then and that brings them back down. And then this can only take 30 seconds. And then you can go into your regular lesson with a more focused crowd. If you have students after lunch where they've had a big lunch and they're feeling very sleepy, then we want to bring a brain break which will bring their energy levels up. And good ways to do this are some kind of activity games, and some games I like to do with that is getting the students to stand up and imagine they're in a big clock face. I'll get the students to say, okay, look at 6 o'clock, so they have to turn around behind them. Look at 9 o'clock, they have to turn to their left. Look at 3 o'clock, they turn to their right. So they're listening to commands, but also moving. And then this will start to get the blood flowing, and it will start to get their focus in. And once that happens, after 30 seconds or so, then you can get the students to sit down and they will feel more refreshed.
Yeah. And do you do that periodically? So if they start, I mean, if you think about flow state, if you're actually able to get into flow state, be it as an individual or group flow as a class, if you're even able to get there, you can probably only hold it for about 15-20 minutes. Yeah. So, which is an interesting point, I think, because after that 20 minutes, when they start to lose, they're coming out of the zone and their minds are wandering off left, right, and center. It might be a good idea then to do another brain break, maybe. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. It's not something which that lasts forever. It lasts for a certain amount of time, and as you get more experience as a teacher, you can start to change your activities to bring the energy up or bring the energy down. As language teachers, one of the activities I like to use is a rotation. What I mean by that, if I'm in a classroom setting where students are sitting in rows facing the teacher, I get them to stand up and then turn inwards to their partner. And then they do their activity. What did you do yesterday? Oh, I went to the cinema, whatever the activity is. And then I say rotate. And then all the students move in a clockwise rotation, one spot, for example. So they have a new partner. This gets them moving. They also have a new partner to practice with. So they get the repetitions in language classes, which is very important. But it doesn't get boring and stale by talking to the same person all the time.
Yeah. It seemed actually, thinking about classroom layout, when you think about the standard classroom layout, it's not really conducive to modern learning, is it? Rows of desks in Japanese schools with the teacher standing at the front talking at them. It's not really. We've talked about this on the podcast before about redesigning the classroom, and I had a young high school student on there, very smart kid, who came up with all these good ideas about creating desks that can be broken apart like Lego and put into different shapes, and having the kids sitting in groups and facing each other in circles and triangles and all kinds of things. And so, I think that's really interesting, and that's something we should be giving more thought to in the future about how we can keep students' concentrations and get them interacting with each other in a better way.
I know, I agree. Exactly. Sometimes the old-fashioned desk and table, which isn't attached to the floor, is quite a flexible piece of equipment. Instead of having rows facing me, you can very quickly get 2 rows together, and now you have pair work.
Yes.
2 columns together, now you have pair work. Or you bring in four students can turn their desks in, and you now have a four-person team, and this breaks up the classroom and also creates space for the teacher to move in between those groups of 4 or 6 desks.
Yes.
And that's a very good way of breaking up the classroom. In some classrooms, you can also create a U shape, which is very nice to work with. And that U shape, the sides are looking at each other, and you have a kind of activity space in the middle. And then that can be used by the teacher, or if you start getting interested in the total physical response method, then that gives you a space where students can act out their actions.
Yeah, because I mean, the research is showing that particularly kids, the nowadays kids, their concentration levels are so much shorter than our generation, for example. And the need to keep changing activities or moving the desk patterns around is becoming more important all the time, just to hold their attention. Because because of the way they're being brought up on using, digital products and social media, that's the sort of way the way they learn, the way they talk, the way they interact is very short span, isn't it?
Indeed, and also one of the other areas I'm interested in is neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. They talk about anchors and how and the classroom setup can be an anchor for the style of learning that is expected. If you have all the students facing the instructor at the front, that's really a physical anchor to say the teacher is the most important person. We're there to stop and just take notes, listen and passively take notes. So in moving the desk around to a new configuration, in a way, you're breaking that anchor and perhaps creating new anchors for a more communicative style of learning, or a more flipped classroom, which is becoming more popular now.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, I did a podcast recently that said the education system is broken. And when you think about the way that we teach kids in schools, or that conventionally teach kids in schools, is that it's a lot of individual learning, isn't it? And particularly in Japanese schools, a lot of mini tests, which is basically testing memory, sitting there on their own in their own desk, testing their own memory on a daily basis. And then that doesn't really prepare people for when they go out to work, because when you go out to work in a company, it's not like that. In a company, you have to work as a team, you have to interact with other people, work together, develop relationships. And we don't prepare them for that in the school situation. So I agree with what you just said about changing the anchor points and putting it more on focus on students, as opposed to the teacher being the central focus point, anchor point.
And it's difficult because it's working against a standard method of teaching where the teacher is the focal point, is the giver of knowledge, and the student's responsibility is to remember that knowledge and then regurgitate it on a test. And so as teachers, if we decide to bring in different ways of teaching, that faces an uphill battle, because I think it's more of a case of explaining what are we doing and why we are doing it, what skills are we teaching and why.
Yeah. Well, I come from, as you know, I come from a physical education background, so I've been combining, I do a lot of brain breaks. I didn't actually call them that, but I've been doing it for years, I guess, because I combine physical exercise activities with the learning in my classroom. So when I see them getting bored, it's stand up, sit down, turn around, do this, do that, about a little bit like, your clock exercise.
Indeed, yeah.
Turn to the left, face 3, face 6. So, I think it's really good. And we'll talk more about active English because you've been working with me on that. So we'll talk more about that later. And so the brain breaks, I think they're good for teachers to have knowledge of, and they can use them in their classrooms. Yeah,
definitely. And then it depends on what level of detail you want to go into, but there's research saying that the more active you are, then this will produce, as in your talk which you did for ETJ, as well, where you're producing endorphins, your dopamine is being produced, which is going to make you more relaxed. It's going to reduce your stress. These are all very important things in language learning. And then also your cortisol, which is your stress chemical, will reduce. So the language in the classroom can be, or all classrooms can be, a very stressful environment. And if you can reduce that stress, then that will help learning. And physical activity is a great way of doing that.
Yeah, and it's been proven that, through when you do physical activity, your cognitive function, learning is enhanced by 20 to 30%. It just makes sense to move while you're learning. And for some kids, that's such a much better way of learning, because, you got your left side and your right side brain kids, and some of those kids cannot sit still. But what do? We make them sit still. Sit down, don't move, listen, pay attention. Whereas maybe we should be teaching them in a different way. We should be allowing them to move and express themselves and learning through movement, as opposed to getting them to do something that's not natural to them.
Indeed, I just read an interesting study last week about a maths class in elementary school level and junior high school level, where the teachers found that certain students in their class were always moving around. And exactly that, when they were forced to sit still, they just found it very difficult to study. And so the teacher said, okay, well, maybe we'll allow the students to walk around or move around, and we'll continue the lesson. We'll see what happens. And what happened is that the students who were moving around, their math score went right up to join, the rest of the students. So I believe people do learn in different ways, and using Brainbreaks, it gives an opportunity for other students to shine and say, hey, look, I like moving around. And that gets them some positive learning experiences.
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to go in the future. We need to go down that road more of tailoring the teaching methods to the students in front of us, and not just teaching everyone exactly the same way. Again, that's another conversation on its own.
Indeed, there's I'm very interested in a teaching method called TPRS, and an instructor there, Susan Gross, she introduced me to the expression which says, teach students, not the curriculum.
Right.
And that was very much about looking at the students in front of you, how are they reacting, and how can you, as a teacher, increase the learning outcomes without rigidly sticking to a textbook or a curriculum for the sake of it.
Yeah. So, well, a TPR, you've touched on that. So let's go down that road. It's something, it's not new. It's been around since the 1870s, I believe.
I think it's always been there. You've had, Aristotle, 2,500 years ago would say, learning by doing, to paraphrase him.
Yeah.
And then I remember you quoting Confucius, again, a similar time period, who was saying that, tell me and I might forget, show me and I might misunderstand, but involve me and I will understand and remember. And so that, I think we've always understood that movement and getting students active is a good way of learning. But in the last 100, 150 years, we've gone away from that.
Yeah. For our listeners out there, I think most people know what TPR is, but can you just sort of
absolutely
talk about that for a minute, about exactly what it is?
Definitely, yeah. So TPR, or total physical response, was popularized in the middle of the 1960s by the educator James Usher. And in a nutshell, his research was showing that if you teach students in the traditional, at the time, traditional classroom method, only 5% of them were getting fluid at languages, and the other 95% weren't. And so it must be something we can do to help this. And so he went back through the literature from some of the people like Howard Palmer, who was in Japan in the 1920s, English through actions. And he used the imperative tense, the command tense, to teach lessons. And then what he did is, in a very concrete way, he allowed students to learn. So what do I mean? He would come up with a string of instructions, like stand up, walk to the door, knock on the door 3 times, turn around, come back and sit down in your chair. And the students would demonstrate their understanding of that language by following the commands, so that you would have a body communication. It would be a physical answer, but it's still demonstrating that you're understanding and comprehending the language. And this is different from, at the time, many classrooms where the students demonstrated their comprehension by speaking or writing. And as we know, that understanding comes first, these passive skills come first, and then the active skills of writing and speaking come afterwards. And so TPR was all about getting the students to understand, demonstrate that you have that understanding, which was very important. And according to Usher, he was talking about the left brain and the right brain, and the left brain being the how people analyze language, their logical brain. And this is often how languages are taught. They'll write grammar on the board and they'll explain it like a science. Whereas the right-hand side of the brain was the pattern matching brain. And if you can say to a student, touch a chair, and they touch a chair, then that is activating the right side of their brain, their pattern matching. And they think, okay, this is real. A chair is real. But if you just give them the word chair and write it on the board, it doesn't have a kind of concrete meaning to the students.
Right.
The TPR was all about bringing the abstract language into concrete experiences.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. And you mentioned a moment ago about TPRS.
Mm.
What exactly is the S part?
Okay. Well then, the TPR is often called classical TPR now. This is the more for younger kids, where they stand up, they sit down, they touch the chair, etc. And then teachers go, well, how do we develop this? How do we go forward with this? And so the S became the storytelling. Is after the students learned some basic vocabulary, then stories were used to reinforce that and repeat that vocabulary. So you'd use the TPR, and then you'd use that language to make a story, TPRS. Right. And storytelling is such a powerful way of teaching English. Since humans have been around, then the oral history was the way history was taught and how knowledge was transferred. So I'm a great believer in storytelling.
They love a good story, don't they? I mean, everybody loves a good story. I remember I had a teacher when I was in high school, metalwork teacher, and I think he was a cover teacher. He used to come in when the other teacher was sick. Old guy, really old guy. He was useless teacher. But we just used to say to him, Mr. Jones, just tell us a story. Tell us a story about when you were young. And, I remember when and he would go off, and we'd be sitting there, right? And all the naughty kids would be listening, Yeah. They wouldn't flinch and just listen to this old teacher tell us his stories about when he was a boy and stuff. It was great, and he could feel our attention.
The storytelling is so powerful. What I love about a TPRS as the method I was taught by Susan Gross was that, in her opinion and mine as well, that many language lessons have a problem because they introduce too much vocabulary in a lesson. You have a lesson about, say, food, and you have 100 words about different items, utensils, and different fruits and vegetables. And the students are expected just to learn these 100 words and then speak. So it's prioritizing the vocabulary. And in TPRS, we say, let's only introduce 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 words, and then get lots and lots of repetition about using those words. And so I suppose that the core of TPRS is repetition. Right. You know, introduce a new word and then try and get 100, 200 repetitions of that word within one, 50-minute lesson.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's what I do in active English, but I didn't know what you just told me. But we have a limited amount of words in a lesson, and we focus on those, but repeat them many times while doing physical activity. And so the kids tend to remember them. Plus, I'm always talking in English. So there's a lot of repetition, such as come here, line up, stand up, sit down, come around, and all these things. They don't even know they're learning those, but they're just naturally learning them. And it was interesting for me to see that the end of the first year of study, that they had all this vocabulary that I'd never even taught them. I was just talking. I was saying, for example, like I just said, come here, listen to what I'm saying, stand up, you go over there. And they picked it all up and they knew it all. And by the end of we started off the year with a bit of translation from the Japanese assistant teacher. By the end of the year, didn't need it. They knew everything,
It's very powerful. Another very famous language researcher is Dr. Stephen Krashen, who wrote the input hypothesis. And one of his key ideas is that comprehension is so important. He likes the term comprehensible input. That if the students understand, then they will learn automatically, or they will language automatically. And that's it. When you say, come over here, stand next to me. I mean, it's classical TPR and comprehensible input, because you gesture, you get the students coming over here, you reinforce it with good, okay, great, now sit down. Okay, they've sat down. And so they're continually learning language, which is in a context, and they will learn it. It's so much easier. Whereas if you sat them down in the classroom and said, okay, we're now going to, understand these phrases, sit over there. Yeah. Let's change it to the past tense. I sat over there. It's out of context and very difficult to learn.
That's right. And last week I did a drill where we stuck flashcards on the wall, and the kids had to stand back and throw like a soft tennis ball at the flashcards. I think we did animals, and if they hit the animal, the flashcard, they called it out.
Nice.
I mean, it's so simple, but it's so powerful, because they were relating the physical throwing movement and the hitting or missing to, if they missed it, they said miss. If they hit it, they said elephant. But they soon learned the word elephant because they kept hitting it with a tennis ball. And it's so much more powerful than, as you said, writing elephant on the board and saying, those sound elephant. A big difference if they're actually physically doing it. And again, as you say, that's the classic form of TPI.
Definitely. And it leads on to Stephen Krashen, Dr. Krashen, in his one of his hypotheses was called the affective filter. And he said the affective filter is a barrier which stops learning. And if you can reduce that barrier down, lower that barrier away, you get learning. And the mechanism to move that barrier up or down, in his opinion, was stress. And so stress and anxiety brings up the barrier and really makes learning very difficult. So if you can bring that barrier down, reducing the stress, and learning becomes automatic. And so many of the games you're describing, the students I'm not learning elephant. They're just going, well, this is fun. I'm throwing balls. And their affective filter is coming right down. And that's my philosophy of teaching as well. If we can bring the fun and enjoyment into teaching, then the learning will take care of itself automatically.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, it's a big thing, isn't it? Stress and anxiety. But when people move, when they move, they have fun, basically. And if they're having fun, learning is enhanced. We know that. And but we know it, but so many of us forget it as teachers, and we don't inject fun into our lessons, because like fun is almost considered, well, hey, we shouldn't be having fun, you should be studying.
Exactly.
But why can't you have both? Why can't you do both?
Yeah. Indeed. So it's and that's where confidence is such an important thing. Fun and confidence is a great way. And nothing breeds confidence like success. You know, if you can get a student to throw a ball and it hits elephant, they say elephant, they feel successful. They get confident, and the students will then buy into the teaching method and focus. And if you ask them at the end of the lesson, you know, were you studying English? They'll go, no, I was just, you know, having fun. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, I tell a story about, it's a true story about a little girl. I think she's grade 4 elementary. And I had her for a year in my active English class. And then she decided she would join my classroom lesson as well. And in the classroom lesson, 15 minutes of study in the classroom, she couldn't understand this one word. I think it was elephant or something, by coincidence. And she couldn't remember what elephant zo was in English, which is elephant. Anyway, she kept forgetting it. At the end of the lesson, I said goodbye to them, bye-bye. And next to our classroom, we got a gym. She went out into the gym, and she was running around the outside of the gym, saying the word elephant, elephant, elephant. I went out. I said, what are you doing? She said, well, I don't know. If I run around, I seem to remember things much better.
Indeed.
So her introduction to learning English was a year before, and it was through movement. And when I put her into a static classroom situation, she couldn't learn as well. So she just went back to running around the outside and shouting the word, because she knew she could remember it when she moved. And that was so powerful to me as a teacher. I thought, wow, I just saw into her mind how she's learning. And I didn't realize that, how powerful it was, you know?
Oh, definitely.
My experience, when I saw it, it hit me. I thought, wow, this actually works.
Indeed. It's, you know, going back to Stephen Krashen, he talks about comprehensible input being the key. He's also a great advocate of reading. Extensive reading now in Japan has become very popular, and basically, which is also called free voluntary reading. And this is students reading stuff that they're interested in at a level that they can understand, which is very interesting, because many reading in classroom settings is designed to be above their level.
Yeah.
You know, so you need a dictionary to find out what's going on. You need to study this text to find out what's going on. Whereas the philosophy of extensive reading is you actually go below your level so that you can read a book basically without a dictionary, and it's fun to read. And then the more you can read, this is a great way of inculcating grammar and vocabulary. So learning new grammar and new vocabulary in a fun way. And Stephen Krashen used to say that comprehensible input reduced the effective filter. And then later on, when I met him in Los Angeles in 2010, he said, well, actually, you want to get compelling input. If you can get a story or a lesson where the students are so excited, they just want to know what's going on, he says you actually remove the effective filter. So in your lessons, you're teaching reading, if you have access to a library where you have lots of graded readers, and you can allow your students to read what they're interested in, then that is a great way to learn English, or any language. In fact.
Yeah, I'm a great believer in even taking that a stage further. I mean, learning English through a medium that you enjoy. Right? It doesn't have to be sitting in the classroom. It doesn't have to be doing exercise. My co-host on this show, who's not with us today, Matthew, his thing is food and cooking. We do it with adults. We call it food, he calls it food porn. He teaches adults through cooking, and after they've cooked, they eat the food. So, and it's great, and they're learning while eating and cooking and having fun. Don't even know they're learning.
Yeah.
So how we consume English is another point, isn't it? I mean, let's use my daughter as example. She's 10 years old. She's lovely. She's my daughter, but she's stubborn, right? So I have an English school. She won't study at my school, all right? And she taught herself English. Now she's quite a good speaker, and she can read. I've never taught her to read, never taught her any. I've spoken to her in English from the day she popped out, so she's always been a good listener, but she couldn't speak. She taught herself in about a year and a half how to speak English. You know how she taught herself?
No, how did she do that?
By watching YouTube constantly, right? Which made me really angry because she's watching YouTube all the time, right? And then after about a year and a half, she started speaking English to me and reading all. I said, how can you do that? You've never studied English in your life. And I realized she learned it all from watching YouTubers.
Yeah.
You know, the Kardashians, all that shit, right? And she learned to speak English. I said to my wife, I said, we may as well just close the school and get all the kids watching YouTube if it's that effective.
It is very effective. And my son is the same. My son is 15, and he loves video games and esports. And again, he does the same thing. He watches these competitions which have, you know, commentators. They have play-by-play analysis coming in, and there's just a lot of content in there.
Yeah.
Look at it on one side and going, you know, why is he just watching video games? But then if you look at it for another thing, well, he's learning, he's watching people produce professional content, how commentators work, how analysis works, you know, how you get better at a skill, and he will do it hour after hour after hour. And if you can get that repetition, that amount of content coming in, that's fantastic.
Yeah. But she only did it because she was watching the programs that she wanted to watch, like your son playing the games he wants to play. Because if we had told them, no, you go and watch this on YouTube or go and watch that, because that's good for studying English, they wouldn't have done it. So it's all about, are they stimulated? Are they motivated? Do they want to do it? Does it suit their style of learning? And if it does, why do we try and stop them? Let them do it. There's been research. I was getting very concerned about the amount of screen time that kids have, particularly my daughter. And then I did I did some research on it. And a lot of the research is now saying, sort of the jury's out on it, but a lot of the research is saying that it's not actually harmful for the kids to be watching what we might call too much screen. It's not actually harmful. There's everything, you know, there's within moderation, yeah, you know, but sometimes we say it's too much, but the research is saying it's not actually too much. It's not doing, because it's stimulating them, it's developing their creative brain in ways that we don't know about as old style teachers. And we maybe have to change the way we look at it and think about it. So maybe we're panicking too much about how much screen time they have, to be honest.
It's interesting on screen time. I think there's some amazing things can happen. I mean, YouTube, the most searched word on YouTube is how to.
Right.
You know? You do it all the time. You know, how do I cook a cake? How do I change the plug? How do I change the settings on this software program? It's such a powerful teaching medium, YouTube in particular. It's unbelievable. With screen time, again, I'm in both camps. I think there's amazing things can happen with screen time. But I also think that, you know, active English is such an important thing, you know, getting out there and exercising. So if you can combine both, if you can do the activity you like, which has a physical benefit as well, then I think that's, you know, definitely better than just being on the screen.
I agree, yes. And this is the thing with active English, as you know, you came down and you did a workshop. We'll talk about that in a moment. And the reason I started active English, because I taught for 20 years as a phys ed teacher in the UK, and then now having a chain of English schools over here in Japan. So it's a logical segue for me to go into combining the two. And the fact that kids are on the screen too much, the mothers love it because we're getting their kids up and they're doing physical exercise, so they're getting healthy. They're getting more fitter and healthier than just sitting on the sofa all the time. And we know their learning is enhanced when they do exercise, and they have more fun. and there's all the science behind it, the chemicals that are released, particularly the specific protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which enhances cognitive function. So I think it really is a thing for the future, you know, whether it's through martial science or active English. If we get kids in particular off the sofas, we get them out, we get them learning as they're moving, I think that's the future, yeah.
It definitely is. There's an interesting American man called Tim Ferriss, who became famous from some of his books, The 4-Hour Chef, The 4-Hour Working Week. Yeah. And the interesting thing is he studied Eastern languages, Japanese and Chinese, I believe, at university. And then he came to Japan for a year, and he could write the kanji, the Japanese characters, but he found a really struggle to communicate. And the thing that he says enabled him to finally speak Japanese in a short period of time was joining the judo class. And then in the judo class, he was reading easy books about Japanese judo with pictures and showing different types of throws and then the words and the kanji. And that combination of physically doing the activity, reading about the activity, brought it all together to him in such a good way.
Yeah, yeah. He had another interesting story because he won the was it the karate world championships or something, or judo? No, not karate. I think it was one of the fighting ones, the physical ones. And he did like he dropped a massive amount of weight in a very short space of time.
Wow!
In order to enter the weight category that he wanted to fight at. So he worked out how to healthily drop all this weight so he could enter for example, the 60 kg category, and he beat the shit out of everyone because he was so much bigger than them and fought his way to a world title. And he'd only started like a few months before, and he became world champion, but because he was so much bigger than everyone else in the same category. Yeah. But again, it was just interesting the way he did it, because he worked it out the best way, whether it to be learn Japanese or to win a world title. He did it for surfing. I love surfing. How to learn to surf as well.
Oh, really? Yeah.
He hacked all these things, and that's his thing, isn't it? He hacks it and he works out how to do it. You know?
Which is interesting. Which is exactly what neuro-linguistic programming modeling was invented to do. There was John Grinder and Richard Brandler in the late 70s, early 80s, and they wanted to know how people were good. You know, why is that person fantastic at this? So what they did is they started off in the field of counseling. There were some counselors who would just have amazing results. So they'd get people coming in with some problem, and then if you saw these people within one session, 2 sessions, they were big improvement in their lives. So they looked at how do you improve anything, and they came up with this model. And the model it interviews people who are very good at something, and it looks for the common elements. What are these experts all doing, and reduces the 20 things down to 3 or 4 things.
Yeah. And
the interesting thing is that they can then teach that model to another person. So it's a way of transferring skills, skill sets across. And so I'm fascinated how that works. The interesting thing about their first 2 models, their first model was based at analyzing language. Right. You might say something like, "Oh, I'm happy," and this is the surface communication. But that surface communication, you could go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and make a much longer sentence, like, I'm happy today because the sun is shining, and I like sunny weather because it's good for my rheumatoid knees.
Yes.
And that kind of longer, if you can understand the longer sentence, then you can start to understand how people really think. But when we communicate, we normally just shortcut it and just give the shorthand at the top. And so there was a very interesting way of looking at it. It's called the Milton model.
Right. Okay.
NLP. And that way you could look at very small details, work on the very small detail level, and become excellent. Yeah. Their second model, the Erickson model, was very interesting because it was almost the opposite. In the Erickson model, using hypnosis, he would ramble on apparently for, a page of speech, but in that speech, he would just highlight with his voice tone 2 or 3 words. And then your subconscious mind was picking up those highlighted words. So it would be like something like, you will feel happy would be 4 words, but that would be kind of lost in a 2-page story. And then it's interesting how one method was small details which you need to understand, and the other one was just tiny details and let the space being filled by your unconscious mind. Yeah. So I'd recommend teachers to look at NLP and see how they could use that to improve their teaching.
Right. Yeah, I don't know a lot about NLP, so I'll be having a bit more of a look at that. I was reading an article yesterday that was saying, for kids in particular, the new generation, the days of long-form reading and long-form listening and long-form writing are fastly disappearing. So again, it comes down to consumption or output. Everything is getting shorter and punchier, and that's maybe due to how they social media, isn't it? And the platforms that are out there now, be it Instagram, 1-minute videos, or short YouTube, how to do things. Everything is becoming shorter, and they don't want to write as much. They don't want to read as much. I mean, even me, when I read, I don't like reading. I listen to audiobooks. I read all the time, but I listen to audiobooks as I'm driving. But my point is, it's changing. So maybe we need to think about how we teach kids, because the way they consume it is different to the way we consumed it as kids, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's
concentration span as well is so much shorter than it all ever was before. We talked about this at the beginning of the, but again, we are not changing things. You and me and guys like us are always thinking about these things, but the education system per se doesn't really give much thought to it. They just churn out the same training of teachers year after year, doing the same thing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, the education system is a very complicated thing. I think a good way to describe it, or how I think education is going to change. There's an organization in America called the Singularity University. This was set up mainly by a guy called Peter Diamandis and Roy Kurzweil. And they talk, one of their key points is they talk about disruption. And then disruption is how whole industries, large industries, can be, in a very short period of time, be replaced by something new. Right. And the classic example they give is Kodak. People of our age, we know what Kodak is. It was synonymous with cameras and film. If you ask people now what Kodak is, no one would know, I'd imagine, because it's a company which was worth about $3 billion. It was $1 billion company, and it basically is gone now, ended, and it was replaced by digital technology.
Kodak, my image was the photo coming out the front of the camera.
Yeah,
the photos, remember?
It did. Yeah, it was amazing, and the interesting thing is that actually it was Kodak engineers who produced the first digital camera. So, and then they had a meeting, they showed it to the board, and they said, okay, well, this is the first digital camera. People would look at it and go, what are these blocky Minecraft-looking photographs? Look at our beautiful glossy photos, and they dismissed it. But then that technology turned into the digital photography, which turned into companies like Instagram.
Yes.
Instagram has been formed. Large companies like Kodak disappeared. So I feel the education system is very ripe for disruption.
Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely ripe for disruption, and it needs totally disrupting, doesn't it?
I think it does, and it will happen. It will happen very soon. My son is now looking, or I'm looking for my son to go to a university, a bricks and mortar university, a building.
Yeah.
I think in a very short period of time, I work in a university. I don't think there will be very many universities left in a generation.
It's talking about that Kodak thing. I listened to a podcast yesterday, a surfing podcast, and this guy was saying about how we used to have surfing magazines, and they had all these wonderfully beautiful photographs in these magazines. And he said there was this famous surfer, and he had this photograph of him, and he used to look at it longingly for hours and hours at this one photo. And imagine all kinds of things in his brain about becoming a pro surfer, and how did he do that, and how did he get his body and that. And then he's saying, but now that photo will be taken by somebody with a digital camera, or like a GoPro who swam out into the water and come back on the beach and instantly uploaded it to Instagram. And the person who consumes at the end of Instagram will maybe, how long will you look at an Instagram photo for? Maybe 1 second.
Fractions of a second, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's gone. And it's gone. And you moved on to the next one. And I thought that was really interesting, because I used to do the same. You couldn't wait for the magazine to come out, and it had just a limited amount of photos in it, and you read it for days and days. And now you look at a photo for 1 second and boom, you're on to the next one. And so it's and that all this says something about the way we learn and the way we teach, I think.
Definitely, yeah. This disruption is the Singularity University. They talk about once a technology becomes digitized, once it enters the digital age. Start with it becomes digital. People get excited, and then it really drops down. This disappointment. It's not really working. It's not working as well as it is. And then it starts going, and then it just goes through the roof. And one of the ways that it goes through the roof is it becomes demonetized. It's like music today. Music today is pretty much demonetized. Spotify is free, YouTube is free. Any album, any song you want, for either a very small amount of money or for no money, you can get that. So that's a whole industry which has changed. It also becomes democratized. It was much easier for governments to control, or people to control, a certain amount of information. But now, as soon as you can get a PDF out or a video recording out, it's everywhere. Everybody carries a smartphone, which has the ability now to take video or record events and get them up onto the internet immediately. So,
yes. Yeah, and the smartphone was very interesting, because we had a staff meeting in my school last week, and we were talking about marketing and stuff. And the one thing I said is, look, everybody, the first thing they do is go to this. This is, I'm holding up a smartphone for the audio podcast listen. And the first point is that they say, I need an English school. Pick up your smartphone, type in English school in my city, and let's see what we can find. Right? Or if you want to check a word, what do you do? Pick up your smartphone and you go to Google Translate. I found an app last week. It's fantastic, Voice Track. So I can go to any country in the world. I've been waiting for this to come, because it's just going to really make me lazy and I won't study anymore. I can go any country in the world, and I can say something to the phone, and it'll say it out in another language.
Yep.
How great is that? You know, I could go to India and speak Indian, you know, Chinese and speak Chinese. Well, it will translate it into Chinese.
Yeah,
but
definitely. We could definitely get by.
In audio, it comes out in audio.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. So when you mentioned that
Singularity University
to me the other week before when we were talking about doing this podcast, I had a look at it. And it was, it's something, it's based on exponential technology and exponential thinking. Yeah. So,
yes.
What 100 years of technology could equal 20,000 years of progress, it says on their front page. That's quite mind-boggling, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and the pace, I mean, that exponential, they talk about doubling is one of the easiest analogies to understand. If you took 30 steps across a room, this would be analog technology, 1 step, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 30, you know, it would get you the other side of a room. If you had 30 doubling steps, I think 30 doubling steps gets you to the moon. So it's, because you got one, and it starts slow. 1 is 2, and 2 is 4, and 4 is 8. Well, this is not really going anywhere. But suddenly it's up to, you know, 64,000, 128,000, you know, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million. And that's what exponential technology does for you. You look at the SIM cards in your smartphone or your digital camera. You know, I was tidying up my office and I found a 16 megabyte SD card.
Right.
You know, not so long ago, it would be maybe a 16 gigabyte. And then nowadays it's like, 128 gigabyte or more. And then, so that doubling technology, which they often use the law, Moore's law, which talks about a technology, which means in approximately 2 years' time, it doubles in capacity and halves in price.
Right, yeah.
And then the amount of, once you have the technology there, the computer capacity, and plus you have the AI, the artificial intelligence algorithms, and you put them both together, it's a
I've always been into the Apollo program, space program. You know, I always wanted to be the first Welshman on the moon, but I was
still can be.
I could be the first Welshman on Mars, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
A Mars a day, you know what they say. But again, you know, when someone said to me, I'm holding up my mobile phone again, that there's more power in my smartphone than the Apollo 11 spacecraft that took the men to the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, that is unfathomable to think I have more power in my smartphone, more technology, than the whole Apollo spaceship that went to the moon and got them to the moon and back.
Indeed, and you've got more power in your smartphone. There's an interesting article on the Singularity University which goes into it, but it says, well, you've got better communication device in your hands than President Carter did, 20, 30 years ago. It's incredible. And not only that, one of the D's of disruption is dematerialize. So the classic picture of the 1980s where you've got a camcorder, you've got a digital you've got a camera, you've got a calculator, you've got X, Y, Z, dictionaries, etc. And now you've just got one device. It does it all.
Yes.
And the power of these devices keeps increasing. You know, Moore's law keeps going. And when we hit technology barriers like, we won't be able to do that because, you know, that's the limit of transistors, it'll be like, okay, well then something else, a new technology will come in. And then when we hit the end of IC chips, well, silicon only has this because it's, and then you're like, well, okay, well then the next technology comes in.
Well, you know, the accelerating technology includes AI, robotics, digital biology, according to Singularity University. So that could be the next question I pose in. Don, where's this going to take us from an educational viewpoint? Where is all this going to take us in the future? What will the future of teaching English look like?
That's a great question. At one level, Ray Kurzweil, who's one of the directors of Singularity University, talks about the singularity event when humans and computers merge.
Right.
And he has that happening at about 2035. So not long.
No.
15
Well,
20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the infamous Elon Musk interview on Joe Rogan. I don't know if you watched it.
I haven't seen it, but I like both of them.
You should watch it. I mean, and what Elon was saying was quite incredible. I mean, admittedly, he was smoking dope and drinking a lot of whiskey, but he's still smarter than me when he does that. So, but he was saying we already have the technology to combine AI and human beings. We can already put things in, the technology is already there to put things into people's brains and bodies so they become almost like, what would we call them if they got AI inside them?
Cyborgs, I guess.
Yeah, he said, but it's being held back. It already exists, he said, but the government are holding it back, or the powers that be are holding it back because they're just afraid what will happen if they let it out.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, that's because it just boggles my mind.
Yeah. But I mean, let's reduce it to us as teachers. I mean, we could be using a lot more AI in our courses in the future. The way we deliver English to the kids, the way it's so powerful, isn't it? The technology that's out there now. And we don't even have to have them. Will kids ever go to school in the future? They could be learning from home online using AI, and then just going to the school to ask the teacher a problem. You know, he sits in his class, and if you don't understand something, come into the school, into the physical building, and ask the physical teacher to explain it to you. But who knows in the future what we're going to be using? And it's inevitable that we are going to be using it and incorporating more AI into the way we teach and the way that we learn, I think.
Well, there is going to be technology in whatever shape it comes in as will replace so many of the jobs we've got. And I think what's interesting is that in the past it was replacing more menial jobs, for want of a better word.
Yes.
You know, the labor-saving jobs. But with the technology now, it will be replacing accountants, it will be replacing lawyers, it's going to be replacing doctors. So a lot of the kind of the middle management and white collar jobs, which in the past education was designed to get you to that level, are going to be replaced by algorithms. Now, is that all doom and gloom? I don't know. There's a big argument which says that when these jobs will be taken over by computers, then that will free us up to do other jobs.
Yes.
And maybe that will be the case. But if you have an education system which is privileging remembering memorizing facts and regurgitating facts, and you have a smartphone in your hand, then it's already outdated.
Yes, yeah. And you know, it's already happening in medicine, because the doctors, we have this aging population, right? So we have too many old people, basically, in Japan especially now, too many old people and not enough doctors. And that's happening in a number of countries. So they're using AI to put the knowledge, to give patients the knowledge that the doctors have. And it is through a device. So in other words, in the UK also, a third of all appointments within the next couple of years are going to be done on Skype. A third of all doctors' appointments are going to be done on Skype. And by giving this data to patients, they are able to do self-diagnosis, or through a care worker or someone like that who goes to remote places and has had a little bit of training with the device. They can do basic tests. For example, your iPhone could become a scanner that you put on the pregnant woman's stomach and scan the baby and then send it to the doctor, and the doctor has a look and says, she's fine, carry on, don't need to come in. Boom. She just saved a lot of money and hours of doctor's work and traveling, etc. So if we're going to give this data, take this data and put it in the hands of patients, why not put it in the hands of students, or put it in the hands of the students' mothers? And there'll be more homeschooling, and the mothers can teach them, and they'll know how to teach it because everything is on the device that's held in their hand that tells them how to do it step by step. That's possibly something for the future, you know.
Indeed, I looked in about 4 years ago. I looked at what Pearson Education were doing, and at that time, they were transitioning from being or in my opinion of them, as being a publishing house, producer of materials, and then they shifted into this digital education, big data collection organization, where they had, for example, online maths tests. And so you would learn maths online. When you and because it was online, the computer was recording all your data. Yes. And then after you have, say, a couple of million 12-year-old students doing a math problem, you find out the 6 or 8 places where they make a common mistake. And then you were then able to put in a bit of advice. Okay, if you make this mistake, then this is how you solve it. And that's, could definitely be the future of education.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening in the medical. So if you've got a medical problem, right, you've got 20,000 doctors treating patients, and they put their diagnosis and possible treatments into the Google file, or whatever you want to call it. And you then have a database of doctors all around the world, or teachers all around the world, feeding into this one folder where people can access. And then, as you say, that's reduced down to the half a dozen most common problems and how to solve them. And boom, anyone can do it.
Yeah, so as an educator, if we're looking to teach students how to do a narrow skill, that skill is going to be taken over by a computer at some stage, very quickly. So can we teach students things that computers find hard to do? What do computers find difficult to do at the moment? And are they the skills that we can teach?
Well, I don't think it can never replace us, but when it comes to, well, I'm not saying never, but it appears to me that human beings are the best at communicating, because we have emotions. Yeah, we have emotions. We can use gestures and body language, and these are skills that if we go too much down the technology road, the kids are going to lose the ability to pick up the phone and call someone, or look at somebody in the eye and negotiate with them and talk with them, use their body language. And that's the thing, that's the power that we have, is the ability to communicate and be emotional, yeah?
Definitely. And then we then look at the classroom and the education setting again. Are we teaching kids how to communicate? Are we giving them opportunities to work in groups, to work together as teams? And in many countries, and my experiences of Japan, that's not what the education system is producing. It's producing at the upper echelons. It's producing students who are exceptional at getting 90, 97%, 98% on a test.
Yes.
But life isn't a test. It has different criteria. It's not black and white.
No.
And if we lose that subjective, in many of the examination questions I'm asked to design, it might have 4 choices, and only one of them can be correct. If I design questions where, okay, well, 3 of them could be correct, but this one's obviously much the best answer, those types of questions are usually thrown out because it's not black and white,
right? Correct
and incorrect. And I think that's a problem with the education system. Is it looks for that black and white answer where life is grey.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, yes, communication is the big thing, isn't it? Are we teaching it effectively? And coming, thinking about decision making is a thing as well. I mean, there's not a lot of weight given to decision making when in high schools and junior high schools, etc. Because they're normally told what to do. But critical thinking and decision making is really important. I remember I used to be a pro rugby coach in Japan, and Japanese rugby teams are probably the best team in the world at running sign plays. You understand sign plays. So
it's a set play, you know, you do this.
Yeah.
So it's a recipe, and if you follow the recipe, you get to the end of the play.
Set play that they do. They know what's going to happen. It's secret. It's got a secret code word. Let's do move X off this next line out. And they were the best in the world at running these sign plays because they had done them 1,000 times in training and they knew how to do them. And then in the game, right, the set sign play is designed because you think the opposition is going to do something. But sometimes the opposition don't do what you think they're going to do. So the Japanese teams, when that happened, guess what the Japanese teams would do? They would continue to run the same sign play. And the guy would pass the ball when in fact his opposition number had moved to a different place and left a big gap in front of him, which he could have run through and scored a try. But I said, well, why didn't you run through that hole in front of you? Well, because the sign play said I was supposed to pass it to him. I said, but look in front of you. The man's moved. There's a hole there. You could have scored a try. And this is so typical of particularly Japanese schools where there was no critical thinking. The decision making was really low level, even with adults, intelligent adults. Their ability to make decisions on the fly in the heat of the moment was very low.
It's interesting that because the same experience happened in self-defense. In the martial science that I study with Dr. Ron Chappell, one of his favorite expressions is you're in your head.
Yes.
And what he means by that is that you are just in the curriculum. The curriculum says I do move 1, I do move 2, I do move 3, I do move 4. But the curriculum is set up to be a learning experience in a controlled event. But you also have to have the ability to be in the room, to read and react is very, very important. And so if the curriculum says he's going to throw a right punch and he throws a left punch, you know, if you block the right punch, you're going to get hit by the other punch. Yeah. So that ability to be able to learn lessons of the curriculum in a controlled manner, but also then to think, okay, well, this is a live event. I need to see, you know, what I do is dictated on the other person.
Yes.
And that's very important, you know, because you're not dancing to your own music. You're dancing to the music in your head. You're not dancing to that, you know, you're dancing to whatever the orchestra or the DJ is playing. And so you have to listen and understand what that is and then react to that. Yeah. And that's really, really important.
And it's important as a teacher when you're teaching. It's important in business, isn't it, to look what's in front of you and to react to what's in front of you. So whether it's your business strategy, whether it's the type of kids that you have in front of you, and yeah, the ability to do that is so powerful. Now, do young kids have the ability to be like that? You know, do they have those decision-making abilities, that critical thinking, that ability to think wide as opposed to think narrow? Because there's a lot of narrow thinking, isn't there? Particularly in Japan, because you only got to look at the Japanese salaryman. Yeah, I don't want to keep knocking Japan. You know, we've all got our faults, but you know, they're like robots. In fact, they get up, they go to work, they do their job, they go home, they do something. Everything is the same all the time. I wonder how stimulated they are, how much passion they have for what they it's not a thriving, stimulating environment a lot of the time, is it? You know.
No, and that's again the power of education. Hopefully, is that you have, when you become education will give you options, give you more options to see outside, and decision making is a huge area that education around the world can improve on, and communication. You know, we live in the social media world now where a lot of communication is very reactive. It's a comment, these people communicating, they're not nice. There's no politeness there in a lot of social media communication. And so I think this is something in school that is really important to teach. And in my university, in my seminar classes, I teach communication. There's a famous communicator called George Thompson, who wrote a method called verbal judo. And this was a way of, he wrote it for law enforcement to start with. When the police were interacting with the civilians, the police want the civilian to do something. How do you do that?
Yes.
And one way is just to shout and to hit them and then force compliance. But this doesn't help anybody. And he came up with a nice a 5-step communication model. And the first one was just to ask, please show me your driving license. And then most people did. Some people said no. And then you'd have to give them the reason why. Well, please show me your driving license because I need to confirm your identity. Oh, okay. And then some people would still say no. And then you come up with the options there. Well, show me your driving license and I'll write you a ticket and you can go home tonight. Don't show me your driving license, I will arrest you and you won't go home for a couple of days and we're going to have to tow your car. And then the last step was, if people still say no, was to say, is there anything I can say or do for you to give me your driving license? To give them that final chance, that last chance. So that is a very interesting communication model. Gives people the reasons, give people options, and then finally give them a final chance. But I was never taught that at school.
No,
and I think that a lot of people would benefit from communication teaching.
And I think it's more important now than ever. They say that by 2060, the most common disease in the world will be depression. And one of the reasons for that is that because of the kids now, isolation, is that such a word? Anyway, being isolated. Because they spend all the time on their devices, on their own, emailing, messaging back and forth to people, and not communicating with people around them. I can talk to kids sometimes, particularly my own kids. I walk in the living room and I talk to them and they're on their device and they do not even know I've walked in the room. And they're not being rude. They're nice kids. They've been brought up properly, I like to think, but they're not being rude. They did not even hear me. And then the result of this over a period of time is that you become isolated and you forget how to communicate with the people around you and interact with them. And then you become lonely and you become depressed and then you become sick. And that's what they reckon. It's just one of the reasons why depression is going to be one of the big things in the future. And you were talking earlier about stress and anxiety. Well, the young people today are having more and more stress and anxiety than ever, And I think Japanese schools are a lot to do with this. There's too much pressure on kids to pass tests and go to the best school and then go to the best university. It's all about one up on the Joneses. Excuse the pun.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, oh, my son went to Tokyo University. My daughter went to the best high school in Mie. So what? Is it really important? Who cares?
Are they polite? Can they communicate? Can they follow instructions? Are they diligent? Do they have good ethics? And
those are the most important things. Are they polite? Yeah. And nowadays, how important is testing? Right? Testing has its place, doesn't it? But at the end of the day, we don't go through life being tested all the time. Testing is not the most important thing. It's the journey, I think, that is more important than the test. The journey that gets you to the actually have to do a test at the end is the important thing. In fact, I would just do away with the test and just do the journey, because that's the most valuable thing. That's where you learn, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, there's I mean, it was always said in England that, you know, what you learned at university wasn't applicable to your working life,
right?
Except for in very, you know, specialized fields. I mean, if you were studying sports and you ended up being a sports teacher, then okay, what you learned at university probably came in. You know, some of it was important, but you know, what is the purpose of education? In many ways, it's just a way of reducing the number of population into a certain number of jobs. You know, it's like a sieve. It starts off very coarse grain, and then it gets finer and finer grain. So you have all the population, and some will fail at this first hurdle. You have less, you have less and less and less. And by the time at the bottom, you'll have a manageable number which you can give a job to, or you can set a career to. That seemed to be the purpose of education in many respects. But education has now changed, in my experience, in that it's become very much more an education industry, where instead of trying to get smaller and smaller and smaller numbers, we're now trying to get more and more people through the education business to generate more money. And in life seems to be that it's a pyramid shape. You know, if you invert the pyramid and get lots of people at the top, then it seems to be that the quality goes down.
Yeah. We need to reinvent the system, I think. But you could go on forever talking about that. Let's talk about your TED Talk. You did a TED Talk. Tell people about that.
Yeah, well, that was in 2015. I was honored to be asked to do a TED Talk for Tokyo teachers. And I was talking about martial arts and science and the scientific method. And the goal of the talk was that the way the human body moves, there's only a few ways that it will move at its most optimum. And if you can learn how to put your body in the position where it's strong and powerful and stable and has longevity, lasts for a long time, it's better to have your body moving in those ways than in other ways where it's less strong, less fast, and especially longevity can be severely degraded. And what does this mean? Very simply, the human body is designed to walk forwards or to locomote forwards. But in martial arts, from a self-defense perspective, most of the first moves have people stepping backwards. And if you step backwards, your body becomes very weak. And it's very easy for your body to be broken down, yet not have power, not have stability. But if you learn that when you step backwards, you can then, if you just lift your front knee and bring it down again, you can regain your stability. And that's consistent with how humans work. And if you understand that, then you can bring that movement pattern into your martial art of choice.
Right. Let me ask you a question. Does that cross over to the mind as well then? Yes. With regard to moving forward, taking a step forward with your body, as opposed to taking a step back. So psychologically, mentally, how does that cross over onto the mind?
Well, there's a huge mind-body connection. And one of the ones is the power of language. You can look at grip strength, people gripping and pulling. Yeah. And if you get the person you want to be strong, if they say strong, 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 they will have a strong grip. If you get the same person to do the same technique and they go weak, 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 they will have a weak grip.
Yeah.
And so your brain is controlling your body, and your brain's experiences, past experiences of the word weak, it's a completely different message than strong. So you
positive reinforcement, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can affect your self-talk can help you or hinder you. It's the classic expression. Yeah. Whether you say you can or whether you say you can't, you're both right.
Yes. Yeah. Half full or half empty. Same kind of thing, I guess. Yeah.
So the mind-body's connection is there, and also that connection is there from your posture, the way you bring your hands. If I want to exert strength forwards and my hand is open in a pushing posture, my body understands, okay, I'm pushing open a door, I'm pushing somebody away, and it will align your body to be able to put the force in that direction. If you start pulling your fingers back, this is now telling your body that you're grabbing something or pulling something, which will give your body strength in the opposite direction, pulling towards you.
Yes.
Which is fine. You want to pull something towards you, that's great. Push away, that's great. When we get into a problem is when, in certain martial arts, they will try and push forwards, but their fingers are bent in this position. So you're telling your body, pull and come back, but you're physically trying to push forwards. And so there is there's miscommunication here, it's incongruency here in your mind body. And then you'll find that pushing motion won't be as strong.
Right.
So when you look at the human body, if you tell your body what to do with your positions, your posture, then your body understands and it will give you a much better performance. I equate it to a gearbox. If you put your car in first gear or drive, it will go forwards. And then if you put it in reverse, it will go backwards. It knows what to do. But if you want it to go forwards, but the gear stick's in reverse, the car will go, well, I don't know what's going on.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So in any physical activity, if you can match your body's expectations of what to do through your life experiences with the movement you're doing, then you'll get much stronger results.
Yeah. And I know you go to LA once or twice a year, don't you?
Yeah.
You mentioned your mentor Ron Chappell, is it?
That's right. Yeah.
Kind of stuff that you do when you go to LA, and
yeah, we're the martial science is what I do, and it's the name of the activity is called American Chung Fa.
Right.
And that's a self-defense, a functional self-defense style of system of martial arts. What does that mean? Functional, everything has to work. If you're trying to block a punch coming towards you, you need to do a movement which blocks that punch. That's the first important thing. If somebody's grabbed you in a wrist lock, you need to be able to do a movement to get out of that wrist lock.
Yes.
So functionality is key. And then the second tenet of martial science is the art of articulation. Articulation is how you explain your actions, especially because people's actions have consequences. If there was a self-defense situation where one person ends up on the floor and they're unconscious, the authorities arrive, they're going to ask you what happened. Articulation is the method of explaining your actions.
Right.
They're like the bad person came towards me and threw a punch at me. I stopped his punch. They tried to throw another punch at me. I stopped their punch again. They came towards me again and I knocked them out. So there is your explanation of the events is congruent with the facts and the evidence on the ground.
Yes.
So that's very important. So does it work? Can you explain what you did? And ethically, is it an ethical use of force? If you have the drunk Uncle Bob coming towards you, at a family reunion, and he goes to kind of throw a punch at you, and you break his arm, and then is that the appropriate level of force that you could have used? Is there something else? Could you have redirected them? Could you have talked them down? Could you have de-escalated? So the use of force that you do needs to be ethical. It needs to work, and you need to be able to explain what you did.
Yeah, I think I should have learned that 30 years ago, because when I was playing rugby in Wales, our coaches used to tell us, "Okay, boys, now don't forget today, get your retaliation in first." Huh? So, yeah, everybody would be lamping the shit out of each other before you got hit.
Exactly, yes. Okay, that's on that.
Get your retaliation in first. That's a good one, that.
And that's a problem in kind of away from the rugby field, that brutal sport, is the mobile phones come out after the confrontation has started. So often you miss that initial assault from the other person, and it just shows you your movements. You've got to be very careful about.
Actually, for people that are living in Japan, we should make this point. I don't know whether you know it, but the law in Japan is very strange, right? Because let's say you're a martial artist, right? You come up and you shout abuse at me and you attack me, and because you think you're Bruce Lee and you're going to do me damage, and I put you down on the floor, all right, and you go to hospital and I don't, I have to pay your medical bills. But you started it, you attacked me, but I put you on the floor and you had to go to hospital, I didn't. It's my fault. It doesn't make sense. But that's the Japanese law. And I know a number of my mates who spent up to a month in jail because of that. So for people living in Japan, be aware of this. Maybe you should follow the Dom Jones method, right?
Definitely. It's one reason why, compared to the UK, in the UK, kind of drunken violence is still pretty, it used to be when I lived 20 years ago, was an acceptable part of UK society. Friday night, Thursday night, Saturday night, I would always see fights.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't necessarily involved in it, but it was not uncommon to see people fighting each other. Here in Japan, if you engage in that kind of drunken violence or any kind of violence, yeah, the police can definitely they can hold you for about 21 days without charge.
Yeah, yeah.
And
unless you've got video to prove that you were actually attacked by these 2 or 3 guys, you know, if you're pretty useful and you put 3 guys attack you, put them on the floor, you send them to hospital, it's your fault. We have to be very careful in Japan about stuff like that, I think, you know.
And that's the beauty of self-defense is many people think self-defense is the physical skills. I'm punching, I'm hitting, I'm blocking. It's not, you know, self-defense is arguably 80, 90% before the confrontation starts. And that is your awareness. You know, you're looking around, what is your environment? Who are these people I'm with? How is the energy levels? You know, why is that group of people coming towards me? So your awareness of what's going on will keep you safe. So,
yeah.
What they call, you know, street smarts.
Yeah, street smarts. Yeah. So how do you view the merging of all these fighting techniques now into what we call MMA, mixed martial arts? Do you like it, or do you like the purity of the individual disciplines?
I think I've always been interested in self-defense, as in self-defense away from a sporting environment. I look at MMA; it's a sport. It has rules. It's very interesting. I mean, you have all the many different disciplines represented: wrestling and boxing and jiu-jitsu and judo. I think it's a very interesting sport to get involved in. I worry for it because there will very soon, there's going to be a lot of incidents about young athletes and their cognitive function is just going to be destroyed. You know, they're going to be starting the MMA in their late teens, in their 20s, and by the time they're going to hit 40, so the sport's about 20 years old now, we're going to get a lot of kind of punch drunk scenario. Now that repeated trauma, head trauma, you don't recover from that. And, you know, and as a pro rugby coach, I'm sure you're very aware of, you know, rules of concussion and injuries you can get through repeated head trauma. And I watch the MMA fights and they're exciting, but I'm thinking,
they're brutal, aren't they? I mean,
they're brutal. In 20, 30 years, they'll, you know, they're going to be drooling.
Yeah, the body is not designed. It's the same in top class rugby now. The body's not designed for that amount of violence, basically. You know, you've now got players who are over 6 feet, 6'4", running the 100 meters in, you know, like an Olympic sprinter. It's like being hit by a freight train. They are dangerous. So the amount you see, the incidence of injuries going up all the time, the amount of head trauma increasing all the time. Same in American football, you know. It is a worrying factor for the future. You know, it's what my son, he's doing karate. Yeah. In fact, I did karate with him yesterday.
All right. Yes.
And I was holding
Kyokushin karate, is it? I think.
Sorry.
Kyokushin.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. And so I was the punch bag. And then he told me yesterday, actually, he said, "Oh, if I punch you like this, it'll be this hard. But watch, Dom Jones taught me to move my hand like this and then punch you like this." And he did it. And he said, "Is that harder?" I said, "Yes, much harder." I went backwards. So he was quoting you yesterday, and he actually said he taught him, to be glad to know. Yeah.
Yeah, there's many people think, especially in the martial arts, that you increase power. You know, do this move and it will give you more power. But it's more of a case of you look at, say you start with 100 power, that's your potential, but you just lose power. You know, you're losing. You know, if your arm's in the wrong position, it's not being supported by your muscles and your skeletal bones. You know, you're losing 20% of power here. You're losing 30% of power here. You know, a lot of punches are like shock absorbers. They kind of like, you know, a lot of the power is going backwards instead of forwards. Now, if you can take lock the shock absorbers, and then you've got them here, then that power, instead of going back into your body, is now transfers into them, into your attacker or your opponent in the sport.
Yeah.
And that's what the martial science looks at a lot at. It looks at making sure your blocks, you know, are not collapsible.
Right.
And if they're collapsible, people will grapple you. But if you can change them so they're not collapsible, then you keep that. That's a big part of martial science.
Yeah, and a lot of the martial science, a lot of the things, you did that workshop for us at the Active English school. Now, a lot of these little things that you do can be used in a classroom situation to have some fun with kids.
Yeah.
Outside in the playground, or, you know, in an event or something. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with kids and adults and teach them English while they're doing martial science and self-defense drills, isn't there? So,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, the event was excellent. You know, I think with parents and kids, there were close to 100 people there.
Yeah.
And it was good. You know, we were able to teach. I was able to teach, you know, how to escape from wrist grabs, how to stop people trying to grab you and punch you. And, you know, the movements were effective. They're easy and effective. You know, the classic military acronym KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
Right.
You want to get simple methods, and you want the decision tree to be binary. This is, you know, sometimes decision trees are, you know, they're like great big bushes. It's like, well, if their left foot is forward, pointing at this angle, you do this, and then if their eyebrows up, you do that. And, you know, there's 20 different variables, but under stress, very difficult to choose the right one. So we were teaching, if this side of their body moves, the attacker's body, then you stop it with this hand. If that side of the body moves, you stop it with that hand. So you had a binary decision tree, which works.
Yeah. Okay, and then
Fun.
I know you like the quote by the sports company Nike, "Just do it." Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you like that in particular? Because this probably sums up a lot of what we've been talking about today.
Well, I think there's a Japanese expression as well, which is called naro. I'm showing my bad Japanese here. Naro yori.
I'm not going to help you. I just
which is basically the same thing, which is learning is doing.
Yeah.
And I think with learning languages, then repetition is such an important thing. In the TPRS method, we're arranging activities so the students can practice one vocabulary item or one grammar expression 20, 30, 50, 100 times in one lesson. And I think the more repetitions you get in, this is the key to learning. Japan has a reputation of not being able to speak English, but I would say you could go out to anybody in Japan and go up to them and say, "How are you?" And I put good money on it. The response would be, "I'm fine, thank you, and you."
Yeah.
Oh, why is that? You know, why has that phrase stuck in people? And it's because they've just had hundreds and thousands of repetitions of this. Now, if you can take that repetition model and turn it to other language patterns, then you'll get much better results. So repetition is so important. So keeping a small vocabulary list, lots of repetitions, and then your games, your active English games, are there to provide the variety and the fun, which will reduce the affective filtering. I think that's very important. And then the final thing about practice is, just do it. But you've got to be a little bit careful, because people say practice makes perfect, but practice makes permanent.
Yeah.
And if it's imperfect practice, you will just get imperfect will be your permanent result.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because there's a lot of imperfect practice in Japan, be it in the language industry or in the particularly I've seen it. I worked in a junior high school for 3 years, and the club system, the sports club system, you would have the kids out on the red grass in the undojo there, and the teacher the coach, so-called coach, who often don't know anything about the sport, are in the staff room having a cup of coffee or doing some work, and the team captain is running the drills outside. And he's a team captain. He's a junior high school kid, so he's not correcting mistakes, and they are running the drills robotically, repeating bad habits continually, and they wonder why they don't get much better, despite all the hours of practice time they put in. Important point, isn't it?
Definitely. I mean, there's, again, my instructor, Dr. Ron Chappell, he introduced me to the book called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And that talks about when you're learning a new skill, the important thing is to stop when you make a mistake. So for example, if you were saying like, I'm going Tokyo. Okay, you've made a mistake. What a lot of teachers will do, no, I'm going to Tokyo. And then the student continues, I'm going to Tokyo tomorrow. And they kind of they're learning. They're not learning, I'm going to Tokyo tomorrow. They're learning, I'm going Tokyo to Tokyo. I'm going to Tokyo tomorrow. They're learning this convoluted method. So what the talent code recommends is that as soon as the mistake is stopped, I'm going Tokyo. Okay, stop. And then start again at the beginning. Give them the correction, but they start again at the beginning. And then they're always starting from the beginning. So I'm going to Tokyo. Okay, that's one good repetition.
So they're learning the pattern.
They're learning the pattern, but they're not learning the pattern which has mistakes in it.
Right.
They're not learning, I'm going Tokyo to Tokyo. I'm going to Tokyo. They're learning, they just stop at the mistake and go back to the beginning. And then if you look at the thinking of zero-sum thinking, if you teach something and it has one good repetition is 1 point. I'm going to Tokyo, 1 point. And then if they make a mistake, I'm going Tokyo, that's -1 point. So in time, they've actually had 2 repetitions. It took longer, but their result is 0 points.
Right, yes.
So, and then if you multiply this to say that your rugby training ground where they run this drill 100 times, and maybe it was good 20 times and bad 80 times, they've actually got a score of -60.
Yes.
Whereas if they stopped at, if they stopped at 2 repetitions, which were well, they would have ended up with a more benefit than in 2 repetitions than they did in 100 repetitions.
Yeah, I got you.
So, I think that's a very important thing to think about when teaching English. You know, how do you correct mistakes? And so that's a good one. So zero sum, thinking, the talent code as well.
I'll have a look at that talent code. Let me just take a break for a moment. Just 1 second. Okay, Dom, this is one of those rare long form interviews that we've done today, pushing 2 hours here. So to wrap it up, where can people find you? And as I say, to wrap it up, how would you like to sum up what we said today?
Well, I'm a great fan of long form interviews, so thank you for giving me the time, and it's great to talk to you. I can be found very easily. I have a website, which is www.jonesdominic.com. And that has some of my research in education and neuro-linguistic programming and in martial science as well. And I really recommend that teachers, take a look into NLP and also TPRS as great ways of teaching. If you're interested in following up more about self-defense, then I think arguably the best website is no-nonsense-self-defense.com by Mark McYoung, and that has a lot of information about real self-defense.
Right. Okay, and let's not forget activeenglishnow.com.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're both teachers, and our passion is in teaching. I think the more we understand about the teaching method, and also they realize that there's we can bring fun into teaching. We can also bring activity into English teaching. And our goal is to produce people who communicate well. And that I think we'll be happy with that.
Like we have today, I hope.
Indeed, definitely.
Right. Well, Dom Jones, thank you so much for coming on the Active Podcast. Lovely to talk to you. Always stimulating and inspiring. Please come back again sometime in the future.
No, I look forward to it. Thank you, Ian, for busy man. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.